I'm Derek Compere. I'm an Associate Dean for Faculty in the Meadows School of the Arts, and on behalf of Dean Holland and all of us at Meadows, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to today's lecture. I'm delighted to see our students, faculty, and staff and community members gathered here for this special occasion, and I'm especially happy to welcome several of our SMU DataArts team to Dallas and SMU. One of the joys of being part of the Meadows School of the Arts is that we have opportunities like this to learn and engage with distinguished voices whose work challenges us, inspires us, and expands our sense of what is possible in the arts. Today is such a moment. It's a true honor to welcome distinguished fellow and guest speaker Bao-Long Chu. Bao-Long is the program director of the Houston Endowment and SMU DataArts National Hemisacre Fellow. Long oversees the endowment strategy to support and grow Houston's arts, cultures, and parks ecosystem. Long is a creative, a storyteller. He believes in the power of art to share and connect human stories, which inspires his work. He's written and presented extensively on writing pedagogy, the connection between art and the refugee experience, and nonprofit programming. What excites us most is how Bao-Long's artistry and career embody values we hold deeply at Meadows: creativity, critical inquiry, and a commitment to the transformative power of the arts. We hope you'll find today's talk both thought-provoking and energizing. Before we start, I also want to thank the Scott Hawkins Lecture Fund at Dedman College of Humanities and Sciences for supporting today's lecture. I also appreciate the team at SMU DataArts and their director, Dr. Jennifer Benoit-Bryan, as well as the distinguished panelists, Margaret Black and Amanda Fransham. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome Long and to invite you to join me in giving him a very warm welcome.
All righty, thank you for the warm welcome and what sorry, I'm putting this notebook on the screen and I shouldn't have done that. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you to SMU DataArts, to Jen for our wonderful partnership, the work that we're doing together. Is a part of what I'll highlight today. Just sharing with you a little bit about Houston Endowment. The foundation, was founded in 1937 by Jesse H. and Mary Gibbs Jones. And we are a nonpartisan private foundation that exists to serve the people of Greater Houston. We envision a vibrant region where all have the opportunity to thrive. The program areas that we fund are civic engagement, education, arts and culture, and green spaces. The last two I helped to steer, and I've been at the endowment for the last 10 years. And so I come to this work as a poet. That's where I live, in poetry, in language, learning English as a third language, as a refugee at 8 years old, is something that has left this indelible mark in me about the power of storytelling and how it can help to elevate change, to create community cohesion, in a time of difficulty and uncertainty such as this. This is interesting work, right? And Houston Endowment as a local funder, I'm so glad that we'll have a conversation later with Amanda and Margaret and their foundations in the way that they think with national support versus statewide support. We have a small focus area, Harris County and the contiguous counties. But that is a big area too, if you think about that. And so just want to share a little bit about some thinking of arts philanthropy. Traditional arts philanthropy are tethered to three things: status, altruism, or access. And so status is that patronage system, right? That we are familiar with Renaissance Florence, with Victorian England, with post-war New York, and then this idea that art and culture is good for the people. It's a civic activity. It can pull people together, and so it's altruism, and that came to a head in the post-war New York, especially with large foundations like Carnegie and Mellon, Rockefeller, building museums and performing arts halls, and then there's this piece that is called access, that is sort of sits somewhat in between status and altruism, and it's funding to provide access to artists and curators and that industry, the artists themselves, right? And so we have this sort of landscape of arts philanthropy, and the conversation here today is about how we can rethink, what can we do that can be a little bit more community-centric, that can drive the connection, but also representation. What are the stories that can be told on stage that would be inclusive? And I know you know that words like inclusive and representation, those are challenging words at the moment. But the fact is that arts and culture is going to do what it does, and it always is about community, right? Whether foundations fund cultural organizations or not, they have always existed and will continue to exist, with or without philanthropy. And so we see this, and we recognize this, and that I think that is important. I'm going to talk a little bit about Houston. I talked to Jen earlier today that I don't know much about Dallas, and I could have come here with research about Dallas numbers, but it wouldn't be authentic. And so I want to talk about Houston because I have lived there, my family and I, we have lived there since 1979. And so, that evolution, that seeing the city change in this way, the permanence of 45 always under construction is a given. And to see the city transform, it's so interesting that Midtown at some point was Little Saigon, and that the streets were both in English and in Vietnamese, and sometimes in those, those evening sunset, looking behind me and seeing street signs in Vietnamese is something to sort of say, oh, I belong here, right? And so that, I think that's what driving the work. Before I joined Houston Endowment in 2015, I spent 18 years at a mid-sized literary arts nonprofit that puts poetry into the hands of children. And I think that was the most important work. And for a poet to be able to see in the moment where a child is transformed by the power of her own words is something miraculous, right? And I believe that we all have access to arts and culture in that way. So a little bit about Houston. It's a diverse landscape. There's that word again. It's 44% Latino, 24% white, 23% Black, and 7% Asian. And I am ashamed to say that we don't have a significant Latino arts and culture center in Houston. There are a couple of very thin and barely surviving entities, one that had to be taken over by the city for operations, Talento Belengue, and to have a city with this population and not have a significant cultural center to pull the community together, to present outward the belonging is something, right? And so a few years back, a group of Latino arts leaders came to us. It was so interesting because such efforts have been formed before, but this group represented both the LULAC generation and the Dreamers generation. So there's this cross-sector of young and I was going to say vibrant, but old people can be vibrant too. And so the thing was that it was this cohesive group, and what they said was, we want to build a Latino arts and culture museum. And I said, okay, museum, okay. And they said, yes, something like the Museum of Fine Arts of Houston, whose endowment is the second largest in the country as far as arts institutions concerned, right? And so I said, okay, this is interesting. So do you have a plan? No. You have any idea where you want to build this or how you're going to get the dollars to build this? No. We know, we just want to do something for our community. And so Houston Endowment did something very strange, not strange, something unusual for arts and culture that we have learned from funding the park sector, that to fund green spaces, we were funding the expansion of conservancies, the effort for conservancies to buy lands, to expand, and building out the infrastructure of park conservancies so they can do what they can do, which is to work together. And they were able to, we started investing in the late 80s in the park sector. Now we have, up to this point, spent nearly $70 million to support the park sector. And so what they were able to do was work together, have a collective voice, and they were able to pass a Harris County bond that provided $200 million towards supporting parks infrastructure. They did that. They did that with their own voice. They did that with their own collective power. And we thought, okay, so the Latino arts and culture want to build this. Why don't we fund this dreaming? Why don't we fund the dreaming? So for an arts and culture philanthropy to say, okay, we're not expecting an outcome. We just want you to discover what it is that you don't know and do the things that you need to do to make this happen. The only thing we're asking you to do is make sure that your process includes the community, that it's not just a group of leaders sitting around thinking, we're going to build this thing, and it's important for you to have community conversations. So they did that. They led with community charrettes. They did all of this. And in a period of 4 years so far, what they discovered, and they enacted this, was that this effort could not be led by an artist or an art curator or an arts administrator. Instead, and the leaders decided this, to have this effort led by a community mobilizer. So they hired the COO of Mi Familia Vota. They hired him with 12 years of experience of mobilizing the community to come together, and he's doing that. He's doing that by having community conversations, talking with civic stakeholders, and now Precinct 2, the commissioner there, and Commissioner Garcia, has identified a piece of land that the county wants to give to this effort. And adjoining that piece of land is another piece of land that would increase this area to 7 acres near Buffalo Bayou expansion in the east end, right? And so if you know Houston, you know anything near the bayou is going to be really expensive, right? And so the fact that they're near this mark and in a piece of work that's led by community leaders, mobilizing the community to come together, I think that's what arts philanthropy can do. We can fulfill a dream. And at the same time, yes, think about evaluation and learning, and that's why the relationship with Jen is so important. And, it's not an either or, right? And so another effort that we helped to fund, Ford Foundation, right after the murder of George Floyd and through the pandemic, mobilized national funders to come together to create this effort called the America's Culture Treasures Project that provided dollars to BIPOC art entities that have long existed but have really frail funding access, right? And so they identified these entities, provided millions of dollars of general operating support. At the same time, they mobilized 7 regions to do regional work. So when they came to Houston Endowment and said, we have $5 million, we want you to match that and motivate your funders in the area to contribute and to pull down this work. So we did that. We did that, but what was clear was that what we really believed in, that it was not our business. It was not my business as the program officer in arts and culture. It is not our business to sit there at our table and determine what are the BIPOC culture treasures of this community. That was not honest. We can't do that with honesty, with faith. And so what we did was we drove this work, got the fund to about $12.4 million, drove this out into the community, and we invited the community leaders to make this a collective work. So they hired a leader that is leading this work, and the BIPOC arts community is determining how to use those funds, which entities received the designation of culture treasures. They created an accelerator program that identified new culture treasures because Houston is a new city, and they're doing the work. And so on top of that, our board recently, last June, approved another $5 million for this effort. Why? Not because of anything other than we recognize that this was wanted by the community. This was a dream of the community to have an effort that allowed them to shine a spotlight on the work that they do, on the long existence that they've had in communities that did not have access to typical arts and culture funding. Another piece of work that we're doing, and we're doing it alongside SMU DataArts, is to ensure that there are effective and robust arts and culture data so that the example I gave previously about the park sector coming together, the arts sector has not done itself any favor by living in a hierarchy of access. And sadly, the arts and culture sector also have this hierarchy of luxury that is hard for people to understand how it can benefit their community. The pandemic drove us indoors and also catapulted the park sector by emphasizing the data of health access in green spaces, right? And the capacity for someone to have at least a 10-minute walk from their house to a park. So the pandemic did that. It elevated the park sector because people were walking the parks. That was the only way that they could have community activities and cohesion, right? The opposite happened to especially the performing arts, where now people are deciding to sit at home, to consume things through streaming, and choosing other options, right? And I think that what we are recognizing in arts and culture, the sector, they have to do this, and that's why we're supporting the formation of strong arts data so that they can have the information to tell their story, to talk about their own successes, to say, we are important to your community because we drive this kind of economic impact. In the Houston region, arts and culture generates $1.3 billion of economic activities. I mean, that's an outrageous incredible number that arts and culture nonprofits, we're not even talking about the for-profit industry, right? And so the arts and culture sector, right, is powerful, and it's like anything, we are powerful when we come together and when we are able to advocate for our own existence. And so arts and culture can do that. And in Houston, where it's such a large city, and the fragmentation that happens in large cities, that's sort of natural, is that the arts and culture sector is just sort of everywhere, and everyone is, in essence, working in opposition to each other because of scarcity mindset of funding, right? And I know my philanthropic partners can agree to this. I mean, in theory, right, that philanthropy had its part in creating the hierarchy of arts and culture sector. I mean, let's be honest, right? We had a hand in it, and I think that the moment now is for us to rethink how we can support the arts and culture sector in a way that drives cohesion and less fragmentation. So that is, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking too that it's on us. It's actually a civic duty for you to consume local arts and culture. It's actually on you as a single individual to research and see what's playing in the theater, what small symphony group is presenting Bach or whatever. It is a civic duty. Because if you think about it this way, if you, the one person, decide to sit at home and, stream Netflix and HBO, which, by the way, are really wonderful things. And earlier we discussed that those models have not suffered from the subscription model, but performing arts writ large have, because that's a fading kind of business model for them. And they recognize that there is the power in the individual to purchase tickets now. And Jen will share data about arts revenue increasing at the time that funding in general is decreasing. So there's all this data, and we need to make this data available. We need to have it present on the front page for arts and culture organizations to say, we matter, and it's important that you, the individual, come out and support us, because that compounded effect of one person deciding not to enjoy local arts and culture will have this knock-on effect that is a ripple across the sector that says, you are not worth it. And it, at the end of the day, it isn't philanthropy that's going to drive the existence of arts and culture. It's the individual. It's you deciding that you want to attend a play. It's you deciding that you want to send your kids to a writing camp. And so that is on us. It's on us. It's our civic duty to consume arts and culture, to know that we can't take it for granted. We just simply can't take, the existence of such beautiful offerings for granted. We're sort of facing a moment of adjusting to the idea of loss, and that is hard, and we're losing a lot. What we don't want to lose at the end of the day is something so essential, so human, so important, so much about who am I as a person and who are you as a person, that storytelling that matters so much. So yeah, that's where we're at. And philanthropy partners can do wonderful things. and also individuals. And it's on all of us to think more broadly about arts and culture consumption. I think the next piece I'm excited about is our conversation, but Jen is going to set the stage for us, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Long. I'm sure you all can see how incredible Long is to collaborate with. He's such a deep thinker and so strategic in his framing. I will say that we also, as DataArts total data nerds and research nerds, love that he's constantly looking for what kinds of insights could help shape these decisions. How do we continuously re-examine strategies in order to bring innovative approaches and really undergird those kinds of metrics and actions with research and data wherever possible. And as an organization that really focuses on providing evidence-based insights that are needed to collectively build strong, vibrant, and equitable arts communities, that is our love language. We want to see data being used for change, to inform action within communities. And we've pulled together a couple of additional leaders from Dallas who are also, and I may be biased, one of them does sit on my advisory board, but doing really incredible work and thinking about how to bring innovative approaches, how to rethink the kind of framework and structures of philanthropy, and how to use data, insights, research to help guide and shape decisions. So I'm so delighted to welcome Amanda Fransham, who's the interim director of the Grants Department and senior program officer at the Meadows Foundation, to this stage. She leads giving in arts, health, and education, and recently helped launch the Texas Disability Project, which I hope we will hear a little more about. And also Margaret Black, who is the managing director at Lyda Hill Philanthropies. Margaret develops major philanthropic initiatives nationally in science, nature, and nonprofit empowerment. And she has really led some really amazing initiatives. The If Then initiative is one that you should definitely look up if she doesn't speak to too much tonight, as well as she produced an Emmy-nominated Mission Unstoppable and has led a number of other initiatives that we'll speak to. So if you could just join me in welcoming them. We will do a set of questions that I've put together, 4 of them, and then we really want to pull you in, and I'm looking to Monica to help me make sure that we don't get too engrossed and make sure we save time for you there. Yes, she will help us with that. Maybe I'll start with my first one here and shift over. So Long's framing for this lecture was around catalytic funding, and I think that can mean a lot of different things in different contexts, but curious to hear about how you're thinking about this, Amanda and Margaret. And I know, Amanda, you shared on our prep call a little bit about some of the innovative partnerships that you've been supporting, but would love to hear your framing for what that means to you and how you're living it.
Sure, thanks, and good evening to all y'all. It's good to be here. A couple of things that I wanted to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying is I think in the nonprofit sector, and specifically arts and culture, there's kind of a double asset that these organizations come in specifically. Nonprofits generally are scrappy and resourceful by nature, and so you layer on top of that the innovation and creativity that's endemic into the arts and culture organizations, and you kind of get a multiplier effect for what we're thinking about. So in terms of catalytic philanthropy for us at the Meadows Foundation, we are a private family foundation located in Dallas, but we fund across the state of Texas, so all 254 counties, and our mission is to serve the people of Texas. And there's a lot of catalyzing to happen. Last time we checked, Texas is a huge place with a lot of people. And so there are a lot of great things that are happening across regions. Some things that I'd like to highlight, specifically talking about innovating on the business model and the membership and subscriber models. That's something that if I sit on another intro call with an organization that's rethinking about that and see the connectivity that's happening between organizations as they are sharing the way that they are thinking about their bottom line. We got a practice run in COVID of what it means to be nimble and adaptive as funders, as well as for our arts and culture organizations. Some other pieces too is thinking about health for organizations at all different levels, the small, the mids, and the larges. And what does that mean across Texas? We are definitely thinking about rural areas as well. You know, the further away you get from the metro, it looks very, very different versus being city-centered. And so a couple of the innovative partnerships that we're investing in, one is rethinking about shared group sales model and what can it be like to kind of cost share staffing amongst multiple theaters and multiple companies so that each organization can get a partial benefit from kind of a one-time investment. And then over time, the investment in that organization and that person pays for itself. And so philanthropy, in our favorite phrase, works itself out of its job. And the other thing that I'd like to highlight too with that is just thinking about space and what it means for rehearsal and performance space, specifically for performing arts organizations. And similarly there, the health of the sector really starts at the individual artists down, you know, they're kind of running small businesses. And what does it mean to be entrepreneurial in nature? And so another one of the kind of catalytic funding investments that we've made is thinking about what does it look like to invest in the holistic health of organizations down to the single individual artists all the way up to small and mid-sized organizations to be able to have the space, which is oftentimes one of the barriers for visual and performing arts groups.
Yes, okay, sorry. Excellent. That's so helpful to hear. I'm curious, Margaret, given your national scale and purview, if you'd be willing to speak, especially to the Nonprofit Empowerment Fund that you designed?
Yes, happy to. And I feel like I should disclose a few of the biases you mentioned. I'm a proud advisory board member on SMU DataArts and a graduate, so it's great to be back on campus where I did graduate work. But the disclosure is, while I am Mustang strong, I am a staunch traditionalist of the pony up, so beware. So for those of you who might not be familiar with Lyda Hill Philanthropies, we encompass the charitable giving of our founder, Lyda Hill, along with her for-profit giving, or for-profit investing, because she is a member of the Giving Pledge and has uniquely decided to pledge the entirety of her wealth to make the world a better place during her lifetime. So we have the privilege of putting that capital to work, and as she likes to joke, it's a very tricky math problem. So our work focuses in three main areas: science, nature, and nonprofit empowerment. And I want to talk about catalytic funding and nonprofit empowerment in particular today because I have a program that I think we've been piloting a little bit, and it really transcends issue areas. And I think certainly the arts can learn from it a little bit. What nonprofit empowerment means for our organization is how do you make a sector really healthy? And so we're focused primarily here on the nonprofit sector in North Texas and also Colorado Springs, where we have a little place-based giving too. So about 3 years ago, we launched this concept, and it was really about trying to fund organizations from the inside out and that organizational self-care. It came out of a listening tour that we did with a bunch of CEOs sort of at the tail end of COVID, and we heard over and over and over that people was the biggest thing that was keeping people up at night, right? These leaders were just retaining and recruiting and talent, and it was just a huge, huge piece. But we also heard a really surprising piece of feedback that came from CEOs at various organizational sizes, and that is that even when they were receiving unrestricted giving, they felt that there was a huge pressure to spend this funding and every dollar possible on programs and programs and programs and programs and mission and programs, and that investing in people and their culture felt like a luxury, maybe sort of the extra nice to have. And it's funny, I was just on campus here last week when Brene Brown was here at the Tate lecture, and she was talking about this same thing, this false dichotomy of even in the for-profit world, you see this, it's not just nonprofits that feel like you either invest in people for your bottom line and your ROI and your return on impact, or you invest in people for culture, and that they're somehow separate. And so we really got to thinking about that, and how can we design a funding program that really empowers nonprofits to do both, and to understand that investing in people is actually driving your performance, especially in nonprofits where people are your assets, right? So essentially, we piloted a cohort of grantees that we already knew really well, which made it a little easy because we really trusted these leaders already and said, please spend this funding in 3 categories: people, stuff, and experts. And so the people is sort of natural, what you would spend on to recruit, retain, and upskill. The stuff is just, what do you need to do your job well? And don't feel bad about asking for a functioning laptop. You know, one of them that comes to mind of stuff was they asked for window coverings for their lobby windows so the receptionist didn't have to wear sunglasses. We're like, yeah, that's a great investment, right? Don't feel bad about that. And then the last thing was expertise, just knowing to bring in people when you need on-the-spot experts. So across those categories, fast forward 3 years, we've now done 7 cohorts, 270 grants, and to the tune of about $14 million, investing in infrastructure and people across issue areas. So that's sort of a catalytic funding mentality. And I might also add, this past year, we added in a 4th category that is just general operating, so that you're sort of exercising that muscle of both and. So that's something to think about.
Can I add something to what Margaret is saying? Because I think you know this, Margaret. And Houston Endowment last year and this year, we initiated our Houston Endowment Collaboration Fund. So in preparing for the research on what to do, we did desk research. We reached out to Lyda Hill. We learned about the project that they're doing, and we saw the merit in replicating it in Houston, right? And here's the thing is, you know, you've been told that, yes, you know one foundation, and grant makers do learn from each other, and we share practices. And that project, you know, at Lyda Hill is so successful. We did what they did. We provided to our grantees of a certain size, right? And so these are much smaller entities, resources to do exactly that: people, stuff, and experts. And that was about $7 million that we spent this year. We initiated an expansion of that fund to increase the number of grantees that can access this. And so we spent $15 million on supporting nearly 200 grantees to do exactly this. And that's a learning, that's a practice, that's a learning. And what we learn is that, yes, giving them dollars and asking them to take care of yourself, buy the things that you need to buy, it does feel like a luxury. And that we rely on our nonprofit partners to do good work, and we want them to be able to buy a laptop without feeling like, oh my God, I'm going to get in trouble with a funder because this is not programmed.
It's a sure bet. At this point, I think we've demystified. Like, that's a sure bet funding, right? Not a big bet.
That's exactly right. Interesting too, because a lot of the data that we see when we divide arts and culture organizations up and are looking at the sustainability of their financing and their models is that organizations with a BIPOC mission focus tend to be in some of the best kind of financial health. And when we dug into that further, we saw it was because they were pinching every penny so carefully and not spending any of it on themselves. Their staff were much more underpaid, often volunteering even for really long periods to run organizations in ways that were not sustainable, especially if you wanted this organization to live beyond a founder model. And so it's remarkable to see that model being used in a way that's evidence-based, right? You heard this feedback from the field and then went out and made these updates. We see that same kind of constraint limiting the impact that can happen for BIPOC-led organizations because they have been in such a scarcity mindset for a long time. And I'm curious if you heard from organizations, either of you who have implemented this, or Amanda in your practices, about how hard it was to make that mindset shift.
We had to really encourage them. And we made the process easier in a couple of ways. We made it low barrier to apply. So all they had to do is just say, this is pretty much the broad categories that we want to spend it. We did not create contracts so that there's no reporting. We simply provided an awards letter to say, you have received this fund, and we're not doing a financial audit. We're just, these are our partners. This is trust-based philanthropy. And so encouraging them, though, to spend is hard. And one organization, this theater group, has 2 sites that they, they have 2 locations, and they have been for decades now been renting a truck to move props from one theater to another, or they use their friend's car or whatever. They said, can we buy our own truck? That would save so much money. And I'm like, yes, you should. Yes, do it. And so, that permission to take care of yourself.
We used a little peer pressure too. We asked everybody after the first cohort to share what are the good ideas of the things you wouldn't have otherwise done, and then sort of have a running list, like we're not endorsing all of these, but here's ideas, right? Other people are using these funds in this way.
It's a good idea to seed it and give that permission so explicitly. As a data geek, I'd love to turn and just hear from each of you a little bit about how some kind of research, insight, qualitative or quantitative, might have shifted your mindset or reshaped your strategy recently. And Long, I think I'm going to turn to you first in this space, knowing that you have a lot of different strands of data that you are pulling in really actively.
Yeah, we've been funding the arts since the beginning, and last year, June 2024, the board approved a revised strategy that, in a way, sort of put into words the things that we've been doing on the arts and culture team. Anyway, thinking about community-centered work, etc. And so the important thing for philanthropy is that we have to have the numbers to back it up. We have to have some evidence, right? And that's fine. There's another conversation about the need for evidence in arts and culture, but we'll have that over beer or something. We know that the Arts Vibrancy Index exists, that SMU DataArts have the capacity to measure over 900 MSAs, and so Houston has never been on this, be able to crack the top 30 of comparable MSAs. And so we're wondering, what are the things that we can push on? And so working with Jen, and this is ongoing work. We are really investing time in this. This is currently happening. One thing that we're learning is that a number that's dragging us down is the number of individual artists that identify themselves as artists, that are making a living as artists in the region. And we're wondering why. And to wonder why means to ask the questions, and also we need to get baseline information. And so we are working with an art service organization that had deployed their own artist survey because they support individual artists. They had deployed this after the pandemic to understand where artists are living, how they are thriving, how they are suffering, or et cetera, et cetera. And so we took the opportunity to encourage Fresh Arts to expand this survey alongside working with SMU DataArts. And so we are working now. We're just in the process, beginning the process of expanding this survey tool. The goal here is to understand what Houston Endowment can take action on. We have to have the information first, and so this is strategy building. It's going to take time, and the goal is to deploy it in Q1 26, but the process of informing us how to take action to support individual artists, I think you talked about this, Amanda, we're going to do a lot of investigation, but we need data in the first place, right? And so we're going to talk to colleagues like Meadows and other funders to understand, what is it? Is there a strand there that you're doing to support individual artists? And we want to learn to be able to take that action. We believe that if we increase this one strand, it's a lot of layered work. But if we increase this one strand, then maybe our arts vibrancy number can sort of move up a little bit. But it's not all on Houston Endowment, by the way. It's not just us. It's the entire sector that's going to have to do this work.
I would love to build on that because I feel like that's where we were in the green space here in Dallas about 8 years ago. Similar stage of understanding what data was out there. So I want to react a little bit to one of my favorite data stories. And that is back in 2016, only 58% of Dallas residents had access to a park or trail within 10 minutes of their home. And we know that because the Trust for Public Land runs a similar composite score for the park score and ranks all the MSA's top 100 cities. But we were particularly struck with that access piece, the 10-minute walk. And so armed with that data, we pulled together a bunch of local groups. Many of you might know the Texas Trees Foundation, Trust for Public Land, some public partners, and really came to design a new park acquisition model that hadn't really been thought of before. It was pioneered here in Dallas called the Cool Schools Community Parks. And the model has a few components, and it wasn't like just one day this came to us. It was the data and pushing ourselves to look at one aspect of the data that really pulled us towards this model. So it's pretty simple. Land is really expensive in built environments, but almost every neighborhood has a school. And almost every school in Dallas ISD has really excessive land. And so the idea was to convert existing public land, whether that was a neighborhood school or a library that happened to have an adjacent lot or an unused lot of city land, and turn those places into accessible parks when school's not in session. So it uses layered data. TPL already had walkability, heat island, health disparities, equity indicators, all the various layers of data. The other component is it was obviously leveraging existing public maintenance budgets, which was a big deal for parks, as many of you know. It engaged neighbors in the design, and it obviously harnessed private philanthropy. So the good news is it worked, and I feel like all you Dallasites should go armed with this data. In less than 5 years, Lyda, along with others, helped fund the addition of more than 55 new parks, and 330,000 residents now have access to a park that they didn't when we started this work. So that was a really big push that pushed us from 58% to 81% park access, and it's the single largest increase in the park score of any city during that time. So we're really proud of that, and obviously it didn't happen by accident. It happened because of data, and I would also add that it's systems data, right? It's data that anyone can also look at and use to make those decisions over time. So certainly what the Arts Vibrancy Score is hoping to do for other cities, and I love knowing Houston is on that journey.
I'll take it in a different direction if we're good with that. So thinking specifically in the arts sector for us, we have 77 years. The foundation was founded in 1948. So we have 77 years of internal data that we've been collecting through grant reporting for a long time to draw off of, which gives good historical trends, and it also kind of tells you when things are maybe familiar to previous times or maybe very different. And so one of the ways that we think about the balance is between quantitative and qualitative data, knowing that oftentimes, certain sectors lean themselves into being more naturally kind of fit into the quant side of things. And it seems like arts and culture generally tends to get fit into the qual side of things, along with others that we invest in. But the idea being that this data can look a lot of different ways, and it's a both and we call it, kind of like stacked or thick data. What are the things that organizations are using to inform their own practice? How are they investing in programs, and what feedback are they getting? Some of the tricky things that we run into regularly with data too is oftentimes if we're thinking about a regular kind of like performing arts organization, audience member comes and then they go. And there's no kind of closed loop for what does that look like? How do we measure these things once people kind of take in our art and leave? What does that look like? And so organizations that are getting really smart about kind of pre and post data and in organic ways, involving it in their programming. So it's not like, you check a survey on the way in, that's the, quickest way to cut the knees out of a really organic arts and culture performance. But thinking about integrating that data, the other piece that I'll say too is that we have partnerships with other foundations, like you were saying, like we're all saying, of this kind of learning of other organizations and foundations that are really thinking about rural arts and what does that mean, because that data gets even thinner when we think about that. And so we have organizations that are thinking about what does it look like for organizations that sit way far out of a city center? How can they be benefiting from kind of the systems that are set up more in the metropolises and bring them into the structures that we have? And so it's a combination of our internal data. You know, we are very lucky that a lot of information flow actually comes, I'll say for myself, I feel very lucky that the information flow to philanthropy is kind of at us. We don't really have to we can seek out and be really strategic in that way, but the information flow is to us. And what does that mean then to be able to utilize that information, say, hey, and specifically for us, something is excellent that's going on in the Panhandle. What other region in Texas may have similar or very different aspects to it and be able to benefit from what we're seeing across the state? Have you met this person over here that's actually tackling the same problem, but you are, day by day making payroll tomorrow, and those are the things that you're thinking about? There's no shame or blame there. We have the ability to kind of level up and say, hey, these connections, these ways, because we do sit at the crux of so much information coming to us, and how do we turn that qualitative data into real action is definitely a focus for us.
Such a great set of insights. I have tons more questions. I could talk to these three all night, but I want to make sure that there's space for questions from the audience. So I am going to pause my questions and hopefully be able to see you.
Yes, very great.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to hand my mic over.
So I have a comment really quickly. First, yes, this is me. My name is Michelle Bonton, and I am with the Anderson Center for the Arts in Houston. And whoever put this on and opened this door so that as an arts organization, I could be in the room, Long did not know I was coming from Houston. But we were one of the recipients of the Collaboration Fund. And I was just chuckling to myself listening to you guys because we didn't really believe it. At first, and I called Long. I said, well, really? Like this is all? And he said, yes, this is all. So, yes, what you all thought and wanted to see really was true. And I'm gonna be quick, I get a little emotional thinking about it because I said to him that dream equity, right? That's what that funding did for us. I also want to talk very quickly about the point that you all made, this idea of 10 minutes of walking distance. In our community, because we are in an unincorporated area, our community loses $80 million a year in leisure spending because there are no options absent us. And so I plan to really pick up on, this idea of the 10-minute because it's about access. And so I just want to, really applaud you guys for doing this, and I'm excited to be here. And hey, Long.
I have a quick question. How are you defining individual artists in what you were talking about earlier?
Oh, that's such a good question because the sector is going to answer that. The survey will help us to understand whether these... Yeah, the sector, we are actually convening the sector of artists in November to provide a draft of this survey and give them a chance to give us feedback on whether the questions are relevant and true to their own definition of who they are as individual artists. So it could be that an art teacher will define themselves as an artist. So it depends. This is what we want to learn, and so that's a great question.
The reason I ask is because it sounds like you're focusing on visual arts, and as opposed to an individual working artist can be a dancer, it can be an actor, it can be a singer. When you're trying to evaluate how successful individual artists are thriving in a community, you have to go across the disciplines. Otherwise, you're just doing a study of visual arts.
100%. 100%. And so we know, for example, that the Houston Symphony pays their musicians well. I mean, well, to make a good living in Houston. And so that's important to include them and include musicians. The infrastructure of Houston with the Shepherd School of Music at Rice, the Moore School Opera House, etc., have created a sector that music actually is a thriving sector. And so that for us, you're absolutely right, artists across genre.
Hi, some of us are at the Center on Research and Evaluation here at Expressway Tower. So I was just kind of thinking, how are you all thinking about outcomes when it comes to art and how you measure that?
Start, and then we can build off and share mics. One of the things that we think about, from a sheerly logistical standpoint, we think about outputs being the countable things and the outcome being the social good that people are looking to change. And we have conversations regularly with organizations about how do they already measure the impact they're having and then use those measurements for the way that we think about grant making. And so that's one of the big pieces. The way our funding works is it's an open platform. There's no barrier to apply. There's no invitation. And that can be great in certain ways and also cause some challenges like what are we looking for? And is this a quiz that's been issued that I don't know the answer and how do I do that? And so the other piece that we do is really have open conversations. We have monthly calls with organizations to be able to kind of take the veil off and say here's how we think about it. The other piece that I'll say with that as well is we really look for pilot and scaling as one of the ways that we think about what is the future potential outcomes that can happen once a model is proven out. And so that's a second way of saying, the cost per change unit in the first grant or in the first conversation may be lower because it's building out the curriculum and understanding how this works with partnerships in the organizations. And then what does the future use case look like to scale? We were, in years past thinking about usually scaling that into like public institutions and how can that be kind of systematized there. But the other piece in the way that we're thinking about is what other regions around Texas have similar models, similar characteristics that could learn from the share out. So we're thinking more like toolkits and being able to connect organizations to organizations.
I'll double click that and say, yes, it's all about it's not about us, it's about you. Like, how are you defining success? What are your metrics? It's even better when that data is systems level data, but it's not an indicator of whether or not we would fund you. Yeah.
I don't have a super well formulated question, but you guys have me percolating on an idea, so maybe you can help me get to a really good question. Dr. Wright, I lead the Center on Research and Evaluation, and in our world, we're typically looking at educational outcomes. And so we have a little bit of an opposite problem, like lots of organizations are saying, what did we contribute to third grade reading, high school graduation, all the things. One way that our thinking about evaluation has grown is this ecosystem lens, right? So what does it mean for all of this network of educational nonprofits to contribute to a really thriving, expanded learning ecosystem? We're really interested in the health of the ecosystem, indicators like redundant pathways for students. There's not just one way for them to get where they want to go. Super interested in this overlay of kind of like the thriving cities idea, right? We'll frequently talk about something like a cultural experience, going to an art museum, something like this, frankly, as a one-off, right? And so in our world, we know that that exists, but we don't really measure it because we're looking for some kind of program delivery because we can count that, right? It has some dosage associated with it or something. So I don't know, maybe you all can help me articulate what the actual question is, but something about those spheres kind of overlapping, right? And starting to make some sense about how these different sectors co-create a really thriving learning ecosystem. And in my world, that's for youth, but I certainly see for you all how that's a more of a lifespan lens.
Thanks for the question, Annie. I really love this idea of redundant pathways. I'm trying to think about how it maps onto the arts and culture sector. So I may circle back to you to talk more about that. But I do think that some of our work across Washington State, which has been about really trying to piece together at an ecosystem level what the inputs are for the arts ecosystem and what the outputs are outside of and beyond economic impact around social cohesion and voting and volunteering and health, safety, all of these community level variables, even things like income inequality across different geographies. And that was a space where we had to go really big, and my colleague Daniel is here, there, helping really think about the framing for this. But really fascinating to be able to say the number of nonprofit arts organizations at the neighborhood level makes a difference for a lot of the kinds of glue that holds those communities together. And we can see some of that. And there's a lot that I know we're not seeing yet that we will continue to kind of figure out how to come at from different angles. But it's really exciting because in some ways it gets beyond any of the activities of one single nonprofit and talks more about what is this system and how does it contribute to a thriving community, a livable community. Okay, I know we are at time, so I will once again thank our incredible panel of thinkers, of leaders across Houston and Dallas. I'm still floored that you had someone from Houston come in order to share. Thank you so much for sharing that. It was incredible. And we'll be hanging around for a few minutes. I know there is a concert in this room, not too far in the future, so we will have to make sure that we move out of the hallway soon. But thanks again for coming, and feel free to come up, and we'd love to say hello and learn more about you and your interests and continue the conversation. Yeah.